Oh, you want the second part of the problem?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me see. I think I have those with me, but if not, just take the second page. Yeah, I found here were the extra ones. I've got one extra copy of the second page of the problems. For those of somebody doesn't have problems 4, 5, and 6, okay? So I wanted to first talk about how these problems can be solved anyway. And on the solution sheet, I started with solution 2, and then 1. Which one do you want? Both of them? 4, 5, and 6? Yeah, take both. So I started with the answer to problem 2 just because it happened to be first in the file that I had prepared earlier. But let's first answer problem 1. So that was, I think, the easiest of the problems. I don't seem to have a tablet to write on, but maybe I won't need too many. The first problem was just to be able to hide something in the left margin, and this you can use, as I said, for quotation marks in poetry. Also, sometimes there's a starred section in a book, and you want to put the star out in the margin instead of inside. Okay. Now the solution to that one, did people find that was real difficult? The main thing here is to get clear the ideas of how you expand the H box as when negative glue is involved. And so, for example, if somebody has an H box of any kind, and then the very first thing in the H box would be H skip minus 100 points, then and then you'd have the letter A. That's different from an H box that has an A and then an H skip of minus 100 points. You see what the difference is? The first one says start at the left at the reference point of the H box, then go backwards 100 points, and then put your A. The next one says start at the reference point, put the A, and then go backwards 100 points. The width is the same in both cases, the width of A minus 100 points. Okay, well that's the difference between negative glue at the beginning and the end. So the solution to hide was just to hide something. You say H box to 0 point, and then you give HSS number 1. Now, H box to 0 point makes a box of 0 width, so it's not going to interfere with the widths of anything else. Then I said HSS number 1. HSS means stretch or shrink as needed to reach the desired final size, and then I put the actual thing in here. So this will stretch or shrink in order to do the right thing. In this case, since number 1 presumably has a positive width, this will shrink to a negative width enough to backspace, and then number 1 would come. If I had written the other way around and said H box to 0 point, number 1 followed by HSS, you see what that would do. That makes a box of 0 width. That puts the text of 1 to the right of where that box appears. That's the superpose operation, SPOSE in the manual. Okay, are there any questions on that? Is there a more complicated solution to that? This one is the minimum one that I know, anyway. Well, no, actually, there's I shouldn't say it, but there's a way to save one character in this, because if I had left out the 0 there, it still would have been the same, because I think when TeX looks for a number and there's nothing there, it finds a number anyway and finds a 0. But that's terrible, because once I admit that, then people start using it as a feature, and then somebody won't support that someday. You can't always trust that empty is going to come out 0. But at the moment, it would actually happen without a syntax error. Okay, that was problem 1. Now, problem 2 was this fanciness on S. And so, some people ask, is it supposed to work perfectly for all letters of the alphabet? And sometimes if the letter is A, you want to bring the text in a little bit further than the width of the A. And there are other examples. In fact, I saw a strange thing last night where somebody was using this kind of fanciness, but it turned out that the first words of the paragraph were italic. I'd never seen this before, but so they had a big italic letter, and then they had to worry about not only do we not have an italic font to use for this thing, but we would have to also take account of some kind of italic correction going in on that letter. So, but my idea on this is that actually this is only supposed to work most of the time, not all of the time. Because when you're being so fancy, this is the kind of thing that people used to actually take the letter and they would illuminate, they would draw in many colors and gold leaf, and they would make little dragons and things in there. And they used to have time to do that. We have time at least to tune up and take away a thin space or something once in a while if we're gonna do it. I would say. Pat?
If you have an H box that holds an italic character, does the part that hangs out to the right contribute to the width of that H box?
No, it doesn't contribute to the width of the H box unless you add the italic correction. The italic correction would otherwise that isn't there. Now in math mode, the italic correction is always added, so that's why you might think it's okay. So if you put an italic, if you put dollar signs around a letter in the text, for example, the italic correction gets in there, and it doesn't stick out in math mode. But in horizontal mode, if I had an H box of some letter that sticks way out to the right or something, obviously it's not going to affect the width, because otherwise my solution to problem 1 couldn't work very well. Because problem 1 was making an H box to 0 point, which by its very definition was supposed to have things that stick out of it. So this use of negative glue, and also the fact that some characters aren't confined to the limits of their box, means then that it's possible to get things outside of the limits of a particular box. Another way was moving left in vertical mode. Okay, so fancy was this solution. I guess unfortunately it doesn't fit on the screen. I should have made up a special version with which we could see on the screen at once. But we'll take it step by step. The first thing is an extra level of braces around this first part here, and that's just to put it in font A and then forget font A. So that extra level of braces, where does it end? Well, let's see. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I think it ends there at the end of that. What happened? This is the EM of capital A font. This M here. This M here. No? In the next line. Oh, yes. Okay. Good. Because, wait a minute. What's happening here? Okay. But why didn't I get an extra space? Okay. Count them again. It must be balanced since I took this from a text file, right? So I got 1. Well, let's start from there. So I'm up 1. Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'm not down to 0 yet. This is the end of it. This is the end of the thing. So I have the whole thing in braces. Okay. So now we switch to that font A. Then I save in box 0 a box that I'm going to use later. So I'm saving it, and incidentally, I'm assuming that this macro is going to be called in vertical mode, the very beginning of a paragraph. And if I had been more careful, I probably would have said par at the beginning, because it's a sort of a good idea when you're writing a macro for general purpose use to, if the macro is supposed to only work in vertical mode, put par in front of it. That'll tend to put you in vertical mode if you weren't already, and fewer runtime errors for people who forgot a blank line before that one. Okay, but I didn't in this case, so I could have stuck power right in there. Then, okay, save in box, save now a box, H box, and what did I put in that box? Well, I want something that's chopped, has no depth. The reason is if I take this big letter and it's sticking out below the line, then Tech is going to say, oh, this is a line that has a lot of depth, and it's going to leave extra space, and the second line is going to be moved way down. And you probably, if you work this exercise or tried to, you probably notice that if you didn't chop it. Okay, so I have to somehow get the letter in there, hanging 12 points below, but Tech not thinking that it's hanging 12 points below the line. But 12 points is what I'm assuming is the space between lines. So I make this box, lowered 12-point H box of the letter, number 1. And then also I backed it up. No, wait a minute. What did I back up? Let's see. I'll nest all these parentheses here carefully. This part is being chopped. This H box here is being chopped, so the chop comes around to this part here, and then this is the thing that's being saved in box 0. So what's going on is that I've got in the thing I'm chopping, I lowered the letter, and I also added an extra 1/10 of an M of space to the right of the letter, figuring that that would be good so that on the second line isn't going to look too close to the letter. So that's what I'm doing. I'm making that box, and I'm chopping it so that the depth is 0. So chop to 0 point says this. The box is exactly the same as before, but its depth is 0. And that's a macro in BASIC. Incidentally, the chop macro used to be very complicated, and if you look at the chop macro in BASIC, it might take you half an hour to figure out why it actually chops something to a certain size. It took even more than a half an hour to think of it, how to do it. But that was kind of afterwards, when we introduced more features in Tech, it became much simpler to chop. And so the new version of BASIC, which is explained in the errata file to Tech, for example, I believe, has a much simpler subroutine that does this chopping operation. It was possible, but just by doing combining glue and all those rules of V boxes and so on to get the effect of chopping a box to a certain given depth. And the fact that it was possible at one time meant that I didn't have to write any more code to Tech to make it to put in a new primitive, and that was at one time much more desirable. Then when we found out we needed things like to talk about the width of a box, then other things, then things like chop became much simpler. Still, if you want a good review of the rules for construction of V boxes and H boxes, take a look at the old chop macro in the Tech manual and see, until you understand it, because that uses only a few of Tech's rules a few of Tech's features to obtain the same phenomenon. Okay. The first thing I did was save a box that contains the letter, like the letter S, let's say, dropped to 12 points, but the depth of this box is 0, and then I have a little extra space at the right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a hanging indent by the width of this box for 2 lines. So the first 2 lines of the paragraph are going to be indented by the width of the box. And then the first line, however, I want to put the box on it, so I say no indent, and that's no extra indentation, because I've already said to do hanging indent on the first 2 lines. So I'm getting that indentation of the width of the box and no further indentation. This no indent says no extra power indent besides that one. But then I have to backspace by the width of the box in order to get to the left margin because of the hanging indentation. Then I put out the box, and then I take away this extra space so that the first word will go on the line. Yeah? Uni? You got the microphone? good.
Could you use instead of the could you use in the hang indent after 1 instead of the h fit minus 1 WD0?
Where are we? H? Right here?
Yeah, instead of putting this, could you put in the hang indent up 4 2 after 1, something like that?
Hang indent after 1. Well, see, I can't both go after 1 and 4. In other words, the hanging indentation is for a special case. That either the first so many lines are either indented or not indented. Or no, I'm sorry. The hanging indentation gives you 4 possibilities, but they all correspond to rectangles. This kind, this kind, this kind, or this kind. You choose one of those 4. I chose this one, which is hang indent 4-2. Now, if you want a general shape, you can say par shape, and you can give left and right boundaries of every line in the paragraph. But that wouldn't be too hard because it replicates the last one. If the paragraph goes further than the given paragraph shape, then it keeps using the specification for the last line to continue on for all future lines. So par shape you would just have to specify the first and second line. There is a way to simplify this. Instead of h skip -1 box 0, I could also have said hide box 0. You see, because I've just defined the hide macro. Is there a question, Pat? Was that what you were going to say? Oh, I'm sorry. I must have got it by telepathy. Your question?
What happens if the first word is a one-letter word like A, in which case you would want the top line to be moved over?
The top line to be moved over? Well, actually, that might be one of those cases where we want to tune it again. But the space will come after this, after the A, and there would be an extra space, and it might not look right. But as I said, I'm willing to fine-tune the particular thing. If there's 10 chapters in a book, I'm willing to work a little bit on each chapter to get it, because that's sort of a glorious celebration time when you finish the chapter. So you're willing to, on those grand occasions, you're willing to get the spacing absolutely right. And I guess that's why book designers spend so much time on title pages. Half of a book on book design will tell you how to design the title page of a book. It's where they get to play around.
Question? Do you think it would be much harder to try to solve the same problem without using save?
Without using save?
Yeah, to figure out the width of the box.
Let me see. I have to know how much to do a hanging indentation by, and that's what. So it would be somewhat more difficult there. I'm not sure that it's possible, but I can't see how to do it right offhand. If I knew how wide the letter was, but I might have to add that as a parameter. That was the way I saved the box, really. Okay, the third problem was the problem of signing something. Oh, Jim?
A minor detail. Probably you actually want the \:A to be right in there with the hbox argument 1.
Where? Here?
You probably just want to have the \:A from fancy to be right next to the argument 1 inside of the hbox and inside of that set of braces.
Where? Here?
Right.
Oh, instead of there?
Mm-hmm.
That would give me the wrong M then. Here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the reason I put it out there.
Right.
I used it also down here.
That's what you get for using M.
Okay. Computers are very harsh taskmasters, and they don't they'll catch these things that I might have said, oh yes, that would have worked, and then wouldn't work on the machine. And that's why it's always good not only to, when you have problems like this, not only to think of how you solve them, but also to actually try them on the machine, because the machine will look at your thing a little more literally. But there are alternate solutions, but I'm not sure some of them will work. I'm pretty sure this hide would work okay.
The solution to the problem I mentioned, one way would be try and get 2 tokens. The second one has to end by a space. So
Okay.
the first token is the first letter, the next token is the rest of the word should be there.
And and then check to see if it's empty, if the next one is empty or something. Right. Okay. And then you could do a special spacing for that. In fact, it would be possible to make these macros quite a lot more general. That's true. And I didn't specify exactly in the problem the degree of generality that was necessary. Okay. Third problem was the one relating to paragraphing, and we wanted to be able to move lines up. And this is interesting, partly because it actually occurs in mathematical reviews. And when I went to Providence one time, I found that somebody's job was to take the output of the typesetting program and move these up whenever you could, because the typesetting software couldn't do this. But it was worth paying the salary of the person to do it, because it saved so much paper and the cost of printing the journal. That it happened that often. Isn't that true, Barbara? Huh?
Well,
microphone.
they feel very strongly about the style. It's not so much the paper as their editorial opinions.
Also looks better. All right, to have it up there. All right, and it was difficult to do. So that's when I began to realize what the paragraphing mechanism could do. It was early days of tech when I ran into this problem. Now let's see how it could be done. So we're supposed to say signed, and it has two parameters, the first the name and the other the address, say. Okay, well, this is the solution that I give in the answer sheet. First of all, one of the key things is power fill skip 0 point. This is the power fill skip is what goes at the end of a paragraph. Now this already makes my macro a little bit non-general. This is going to apply to every paragraph. And so actually in practice, if we're having this where some paragraphs are not going to end with a signature, then we would have to redefine the power operation so that it would reset power fill skip at the end of the paragraph. Or else, no, I guess it wouldn't be too bad. I could put I could restore the ordinary power fill skip right here at the end of this power, and I could stick this power fill skip 0 point here, because power fill skip is looked at, I believe, only at the beginning of the paragraph routine. Is that right, Michael?
I think if you put another grouping around power fill skip, that
I see. To put this in here, and then put groups before and after. Yeah, that's right, Lynn. Yeah, I think so, because the power fill skip will go away at the end, but during the time the power will eject the paragraph and set the lines. That would do it. Yeah, computer will tell us for sure. Now I started with an unskip here. This isn't really absolutely necessary, but I thought I'd mention that this is again a way that you can start a macro that you assume is going to occur before somebody has typed a space. In horizontal mode, you don't want really this signature thing to be preceded by a space. In the two examples, it wasn't. But suppose somebody went to a next line and then said signed. This unskip would take away that extra space. Then I give a space that is unbreakable, penalty H-fill with 1L, which is enough to fill a line comfortably. And then I give a penalty of 80. That's 80 is kind of subjective, but that's we'll talk about in a minute. Then I skip 2M. This was the minimum space that I wanted to allow between here and here. If you couldn't do it with 2M's between, then it would drop down. That was that 2M could be varied to whatever the style convention is. But you try to squeeze things so that there would be at least 2M's of space before the reviewer's signature. That's what the 2M is. Then I gave a null box, and followed by unbreakable, penalty 1,000, unbreakable stretching. Well, we'll talk about, this is the hard part of it, between the first penalty 1,000 and this last H fill here. But then afterwards comes the signature itself, so I slanted the name of the person, and I added the italic correction, and then I put a space, and I put the address in parenthesis and came to the end of the paragraph question there.
It decides to break between number 1 and number 2 after the person's name.
Yeah, it would if it was a very long. The person's name might have many spaces in, and the address might have many spaces in. It might be Centre de Hope et tu, something like that. And this signature would actually then might actually fit. Take 5 or 6 lines, but it would end flush right, and there would be at least two M's of space between the signature and the text of the paragraph. Yeah, good point. Now, what do we have here? Then we have penalty, but the unbreakable part, the parts that between the text itself and the beginning of the signature, there's only one place a break could occur, and that's at this penalty 80. You can't break at glue that's not preceded by a box or something like that. So you can't break at a glue that's preceded by a penalty. So penalty 80 is the only conceivable place to break. So it says either you break and pay 80 points for taking an extra line, or you don't break, and then you have to fit, of course. Your badness had better not be too bad. If you do break, then the line preceding the break ended with a fill. The line after the break ended with 2 M's and a fill. So the line after the break even doesn't start flush left. The signature isn't going to occur right at the left at the left margin. So it's a fill preceded by 2 M's. And you could adjust that, of course, by putting a different skip in here if you wanted to. But that's the case if you do break. You paid a penalty of 80, and the badness on the 2 lines that have the fill in is essentially 0. So the badness part of the demerits is negligible on those 2 lines where the break occurred. But if you did not break, then you've got a badness of 0 on the line where no break occurred. But what's the total amount of glue is 2 M's plus fill, plus filler. Okay. Notice the H box null here. You know why that was there. That was so that this H fill wouldn't disappear after the break. After breaking at the penalty, you wipe off the following glue up until you get to another box. So this box stops that operation. Another question. Why the 80? That was similar to other penalties. Hyphenation was 50, and I don't know. I tend to think now, this is something that I did when I wrote the line breaking paper months ago, and I tend to think now I'd raise that to a couple hundred. The reason was that we found a case where somebody would prefer to take to drop. So we had one coming down here, and then the next line came afterwards. And we said, well, why did TeX prefer that? And the reason was there was a hyphen here on the second last line. Now TeX adds a penalty for hyphenating the second last line of a paragraph. So moving this up here would have looked like the second last line of a paragraph was hyphenated, and it charged that extra little penalty. So I have to make this high enough that it won't prefer that just because of a second last line of a paragraph hyphenated thing. Tony?
As a less elegant but perhaps more structured solution, could you save the signature away in a box and then compare dimensions with space remaining on the line and make it conditional?
The saving the signature away in a box would fail only when the signature is supposed to span more than one line. And that doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. That they sometimes give a very long signature. So that was it would work. However, wait a minute. The first part of it, that's all I listened to. What was the rest of your solution?
Well, I don't know whether you can compare the width of that box that you've saved away with the remaining space on the line and make a conditional decision.
In text source language, the only thing that would do that would be the calculation of if it were displayed. So then what you could do is you would save the signature in a box, you would write justify it, then you would set the disp A skip to be 0 and the disp B skip to be 0 and the disp skip to be 0, and then you would set that as a displayed formula, and you'd set the disp A skip to be negative 12 points, and then it would set that displayed formula by moving it up, because the only thing in TeX that really checks the width of the line right now, as TeX is now constituted, is the displaying of a formula, and then it uses disp A and B skip for following a short line, but not the other. That would have been a solution, but it's hard to say that's either more structured or more elegant. If we had a way to go in and look at the width of the last line on a paragraph built into TeX, then that would be another way to do it. But actually, I prefer to use the solution that ties it in with the optimizing calculation, because this will also try to save a line at the end of the paragraph because the first part of that paragraph has many ways of being set, and instead of saying so it might be better than to move to do something different in the first part of the paragraph so that we can get the signature in there and avoid the penalty, and so that'll all be taken care of in the same way by using this solution. David?
So one point you said the line breaks the penalty the H skip 2 and will show up on the next line along with the H skip. Because mine is working.
That's right. I did make. I'll repeat the question. He pointed out that I made a mistake when I said you would get at least 2 M's on the next line, and that's false. If you broke at the penalty 80, this H skip 2M goes away, and the next line would just have the H fill. So the next line signature might in fact come out left justified. If you didn't want that, you should, for example, suppose I put an H skip 1M here and an H skip 1M on the next line. Then I would have always at least 2 M's, but at least 1 M at the left of the next line. Yeah, thanks for catching me on that one. Another question in the back.
Question. If you're willing to do with a penalty 0, where you have the penalty 80, could you then dispense with the penalty 1000s?
If I'm willing to do with the penalty 0, could I dispense with the penalty 1000? So that would say then that you would break at the H fill or not. No, then you see, you would never break at the H skip 2M. You would break at the H fill. And that would be kind of disastrous, because then it would insist that the previous line end flush right. The H fill that would force TeX to bring this word added flush right. Yeah, it's good to it's not easy to get to get all this in your mind. You know, it takes only 3 or 4 years it took me before today. I don't know how long it took before I started getting to feel the way these paragraphs work under the optimization criterion. But it is possible to learn it anyway. That's all I can say. But it is a higher level. It's not as easy as a deterministic method when you're using an optimizing scheme. So here we're allowing we're not in control. We're saying do your own thing, TeX paragraphing mechanism, and we're giving it guidelines, but we're not in control, and this is a little bit hard for us to give up our general ideas, but you can, and you can enjoy it too afterward. I feel that some of these details, though, are definitely in the. I have to say that to design a beautiful format routine for TeX is a level of difficulty harder than for other typesetting systems. I don't think it's more difficult for the user of the format systems to do the typing, but for the designer, I think the designing has to be, because it has this optimization component in it, is not simpler than with a deterministic system. I have to admit that. Now, problem 4 was this one about points, just specifying points. Okay, the solution that I have here is starts out line skip 0, baseline skip 0. This means then that boxes are going to be plastered right next to each other, jammed right next to each other. I didn't discuss that in this course yet, but there's this. The baseline skip is when we add something to a vertical list, and there was previously a box in the list. The tech will calculate interline glue between boxes, and the interline glue gets inserted between one box and the next one in any vertical list. Now, the baseline skip tells how far you want the baselines of those two boxes to be. So we try to get the baseline skip B in there if we can. Now, if this second box is small, then the interline glue is the amount of baseline skip minus the depth and height of these two adjacent boxes. So that's the interline glue gets calculated. There's also stretching and shrinking in the interline glue. That's copied just from the baseline skip, which is 0. No plus here. If I had said plus, that stretching and shrinking gets stuck in there. But the main part of it is calculated so that the baselines will come the right distance apart. On the other hand, if this second box were very tall, went like that, then this would not be a nice situation. So the box is moved down, and the interline glue is set to equal the line skip glue in that case. Then there's a question: where do you decide to draw the line? Because maybe you'd like to switch to line skip glue if these boxes got close to each other. That actually arises in the EQ align macro. I changed the EQ align macro in BASIC over the weekend just because I've been wanting to do it for a long time. But the thing was, it gives a little extra space between lines in a displayed formula. That's typical in printing, and so typically you'll have extra. The lines will open up a little bit. So I open up a line so that the baseline skip is 15 points in EQ line instead of 12, and that was in there for a long time in EQ line. But now, what happens if these formulas, these boxes on two adjacent lines were just so that they would come out 15 points apart? That would then it wouldn't look like you were opening them up 3 extra points. So those lines would look like they were just as close together as they would be in a non-displayed formula. So there's also line skip limit, and the new version of EQ align sets the line skip limit equal to 3 points, which means that if boxes come within 3 points of each other, then you're going to add the line skip glue, which in this case is 3 points. Now, if you watch this as a continuous function, if the line skip in the EQ align, I set baseline skip to 15 and the line skip to 3, and that meant that if the space between boxes was between 0 and 3 points, I was not adding anything to the sorry, but as soon as the boxes afterwards it started growing. No, there was a jump at 3 points. If the boxes were 3 points apart or less than 3 points apart, essentially they would be placed. Let's see. Just as they were, yeah, 50, yeah. But if they were, yeah. So then all of a sudden it would jump. All of a sudden it would jump when they were just touching. Then they would come 3 points apart. That's what it is. So I had this jump effect. So if I'm setting the line skip up high, the line skip limit ought to be set high. The line skip limit can also be set negative, which is I don't mind if boxes interfere, because maybe there's two lines that have, one of them comes down here and the other one comes up over here. They don't really clash. And so sometime you might need an application where you like the line skip limit to be negative and allow this kind of overlap to occur. But that's living dangerously. Anyway, there are these three things. If line skip and baseline skip are both 0, you don't have to worry about line skip limit. In any case, it's going to butt the boxes together because line skip equals baseline skip in both cases. So the interline glue would be 0 in any case. Now this is so that I can put several boxes together in a row and not worry about any baseline calculations or anything being done. But that was the trick in this. But I should mention, by the way, that that if you tried to solve these problems and didn't get the answer, you shouldn't feel bad about it. Only feel bad if you didn't try. But if you tried and didn't, then I think that the main point is to learn and to prepare yourself to appreciate the solution afterwards. Not to discover it so much as to get your mind prepared for this kind of this kind of input. I set the var unit to 1/2 inch because I was going to do everything in VUs. And I also set a space at the top of the page so that I would start my example 6 VUs down from the top. These are kind of arbitrary things to position the origin. But here was the point macro. So I delimited it by spaces. As you see, that's what the delimiters look like. They are here. Space, the carriage return and space are equal. Delimit. But I put a space afterwards so that it would read until the end of the space. Then the main thing was to make a V box 0 points high and 0 points deep. That's both necessary. So I'm going to get it 0 points high. And do I have it 0 points deep? I better. Huh? I hope so. Otherwise it won't work. Let's check it. Okay, 0 points high anyway. And then I can put these V boxes after each other, but the V box is actually going to skip around and put the points in the right place, even though it's something like the hide, but worse. Okay, so now I do a V stretch or shrink, which will move up or down as necessary, and then I make a V box whose height is the Y coordinate. So so now I have a V box whose height is the Y coordinate here. That's the height of this second V box. Whoops. That's the Y coordinate, the second coordinate. Then inside of that V box, what is there? Well, there's an H box that goes 2 VU to the right and then 1 VU more. That was just so that I wouldn't fall off the left margin. So I added a little extra. So, but I'm moving X to the right. So I start out with a box that's sort of X plus 2 to the right. Then I typeset the thing. So I set a $ bullet, thin space, and gave the coordinates, close $. And that was the end of the H box also. So then I put my bullet and the XY here. And that's the H box. Now, then what happens? Then I put another VSS at the end of this V box, so that this H box would move all the way up to the top of the V box, and so that the depth of the V box would be 0. So this H box, this actually raises up to the right position. The the height of this H box is actually the height of the right parenthesis, and if I had given a coordinate that was something like 2 to the 2 to the 2, it would have been higher, and I probably would have got the point in the wrong position. So this isn't absolutely perfect. Well then, so that's what that VSS does. So here I have an example where there's a VSS at the beginning of a V box and a VSS at the end of the V box. Now if you don't understand the example, run it and trace the boxes that get computed, and just look at the boxes. I showed you on Monday how the boxes are constructed, and then you'll see, I think. So this made a box of 0 height, 0 width, and if the reference point of the box was there, it actually TeX would go up Y to the right X and typeset the X and Y. All right. That was kind of a trick, but it just proves that you can actually position things arbitrarily on a page, and so I first used this kind of a trick when I was doing a family tree, where a computer program had computed the place where we wanted to put everyone's name and address and so on the page. So then the macro would just position the box containing the text of the names and addresses, marriage dates and all that stuff in the right place, using some idea like this. One box after another, each one gets moved to the right position. The fifth, I got to talk about the challenge problem a bit before we finish today. So someone said it was the challenge to figure out how to tip the copy and cut it off here. No, this was just to show you that what the file looks like. There's a file that's consistent. This is the same text that someone had used last week. That's where I got the idea from about this St. Paul writing about love. But each verse starts with a @ sign and a space, and not necessarily at the beginning of a line, but you could assume that if you wanted to. But anyway, that text file is already in there, so that those of you who want to solve this problem can just don't have to read it in ends with flush page macro. But the problem is to get these numbers in the right-hand margin in the middle of a paragraph, so that wherever there's a beginning of a new verse, the corresponding verse number would appear on that same line. Now, it's not hard, in fact, to attach a marginal note to the beginning of a paragraph. That would be a fairly simple macro. At the beginning of a macro, we could have something that was like hide, except instead of hiding it at the left, we could make a H box to size and then stick something out in the right-hand margin, H box par or something, a bunch of notes about that paragraph. And that's what that's all most people need for marginal notes. They just say, well, here's a note I'd like to include with certain paragraph, and that would be a fairly easy macro to add, and it's used in a lot of books. Less often does somebody want to give marginal notes in the middle of a paragraph, and this is what this challenge problem is, where we're trying to get the verse number in the middle of the paragraph. And you can assume that there aren't three verse numbers in the same line, because in fact that never occurred in the whole Jerusalem Bible. The Jerusalem Bible uses this format, and that's why I got this. And this is the Jerusalem Bible translation. I hope I haven't violated copyright too badly. This is the style that they use, and they never have to worry about more than two verses on a line. In fact, the average, you typically go about 2.5 lines between verses. But here was a case where there were 2 on a line, and in this case I set these numbers 8 points apart, otherwise they're 12 points apart. And usually when you have 2 in a line, the next line isn't going to have 2 either. So that I didn't have to, otherwise I would put these 6 and 7 a little closer together to worry about 2 lines in a row with 2. So I'll assume that on 2 consecutive lines you'll have at most 3 verses. That's a reasonable assumption. That's valid in the Bible. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept, but it only occurs once. Most of them are very small, very, very large. Okay, now here, just to show you that I was getting different pages, I had this first page and I had the second page, which was flushed out. But of course, this is a rather not a very big page, but I didn't have a very big example. So I wanted to do that. Okay, so that's the problem, and we'll discuss it more about it tomorrow. Tomorrow's topic is output routines. Okay. Now, write justify the following. This is exercise 5. And this was a problem of trying to devise a general purpose macro for people that didn't want to type a lot of TeX codes, so that they would just type the lines that were to be right justified, and the carriage return would be enough to tell TeX that was it. Okay, so this is a change code exercise. And the code of 15, octal 15, is the carriage return, and changing that a carriage return to an other char is necessary if you're going to recognize the carriage return. Now, this is a very dangerous thing, because carriage returns are not only end of line, but they're somehow built in to TeX that you get carriage returns when you enter something from your terminal. They aren't all exactly the same as other characters, and it's hard to end a line of your instructions without hitting a carriage return, so you also have to be a little careful of that. Well, so I defined it anyway, and I started with par, just to be sure I was in vertical mode. Then the macro, when it gets called, is going to change the code. Of course, with the macro, as I'm reading it now, this is just text. It's not, the code is still the ordinary carriage return that's in effect at this point. But after the macro is active, the code will be changed. Then after it changes the code, then it does this vskip minus 12 points. That's because it's going to turn out, and I still don't know exactly why. Oh, I do, but the very first line is going to be blank. So it printed out one blank line, and this backspace is over over the blank line. The reason is that there's a carriage return at the end of write justify the following. That's followed by a carriage return, and that carriage return turns out to be detected. It hasn't been gobbled up yet. After you've changed the code to 12, that carriage return is still sitting there. Just the fact that it was a non-letter was enough but it stayed in the buffer. It didn't get flushed into a space. I don't know why, but it doesn't. I checked it again today. You see if you can find another example, but I bet you it doesn't. Now,
why can't the carriage return after the write justify the following in the definition?
Have an equal space at the end.
when I'm calling write justify, this goes into the scanner. It doesn't go into the mouth routine that says throw away the return. You might think of another way, but this works. I'm going to need another one like this, so one more won't hurt me. Then I have a routine called RJN, which I set to be RJ. That's for write justify, and RJN is going to change later. So I start out and say let RJN equal RJ. Initially RJN is RJ, and then I call write justify. So the RJ macro, that's the thing that's going to write justify every line. And then in order to define the RJ macro, I'm going to define carriage return to be another char. And the RJ macro is defined right there. And then quick, before I got into more trouble, I changed the carriage return back to 5 again. So this is the definition of RJ, there are those two lines. But I had to change the carriage return to 5 again before I got to the end of another line. Otherwise I get to things like undefined control sequence. I don't know. It'll start getting carriage returns in my output file, yes. And I forget what character they are. Yeah, you've done that. Okay, so I had to temporarily change the code of 15 while I was defining this macro, but I quick got rid of it again as soon as I could, and I did a carriage return right there. So that carriage return is the delimiter of parameter number 1. So parameter number 1, and then the carriage return after it is what's going to trigger this whole thing. Okay, now write justified line. So after I get into the macro, it's quite simple. I call rjustLine on the parameter, and then I call rjn. Remember, rjn is what I set equal to rj. So that will do it over and over and over again until you get to end write justify. Okay. So now let's see. Let's before I reveal the rest of the answer, of course you have it there in front of you. But you get to end write justify. So end write justify is going in as the parameter to rj. So now we're calling rj of end write justify, and it'll call rjustLine of end write justify, and then it'll do rjn. So what does end write justify want to do? It wants to print out a blank line, back up one line. There's no way, we've already called rjustLine, we're going to align whether we want to or not. It's going to back up one line because of that blank line, and then but it also going to change rjn so that rjn will now exit, something like that. So in fact, I didn't do exactly that. I defined end write justify to change rjn to be end rj macro. So we get a write justified line of nothing. And then rjn is now end rj, so now we get out, and that's the final concluding thing is to change code carriage return back to 5, and then skip back over the blank line that we ended with. That was the way to do it. Question? Here?
You have used some technique in which you have the
Okay, yes, that's a good question. So this was right justify the following, number one, and then end right justify. Okay, something like that. Now, there's at least, the first problem with that is that you wouldn't dare do this definition, because then number one would be scanned, ignoring carriage returns. So you have to have a way of changing the code of carriage return before scanning number one. So first of all, you would have to define right justify the following to be something that changes the code, and then you could call another RJA macro or something after the code has been changed that would read in the parameter up to end right justify into number one, and then that parameter then all the carriage returns in that parameter are those are coded as and it would be difficult but probably possible because I made it 12.
You could have always just defined at the beginning that the carriage return is a control sequence, but first define it just to be a carriage return, and then change its definition.
These are possible, but very tricky, and you can think of examples where this doesn't quite give you what you want. So it would work on most examples, but the way I've done it here is much less is much more general. Now I want to get to number 6, and we're running out of time, but you still have a question. Okay.
Just a quick question, perhaps along the change line. If you had used the change code carriage return 13 to be a par null H fill.
Okay.
And then end right justified just sets it back to what it's supposed to be. Wouldn't that have worked, at least on the examples you have, where there's at most one line?
Yes, it would have. That's good.
And that's very simple to enter.
You have to also, of course, change the par fill skip and
other
the
things.
par indent to 0. Yeah, but that would do it. So he's saying that that change every carriage return from then on into a paragraph end and then a paragraph beginning and so on. Yeah, that's interesting.
Alternate is to use line break instead of par.
Line break instead of par. That would take quite a few lines properly and not fill up too much the memory. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, the way I did it was probably more tricky, but I believe it probably is more robust also. Now the last one, and we only have a minute or two. This was the one to get lines going up and down. Actually, now this changing the code of the $sign to 12 and back to 3 again isn't really necessary. When I first wrote it, I thought it was, but then thinking about it afterwards, I realized that I'm only using it to match up to look for a $sign at the end of a text. I'm putting a $sign in at the end of my parameter list, and then I'm testing to see when I got to the end here in these places, and that doesn't. But the if test doesn't look to see what the code is. So an ordinary math parameter $sign would have been just as good in both of these examples. It doesn't go into math mode unless you actually parse it. Question? You got the mic?
I thought that you compared tokens instead of...
No, it doesn't. It doesn't care what they are. You think it should? Well, I don't think it should. Okay, but if it did, then we would want this code here. But it doesn't right now anyway. I know it just looks at the character part and make sure that it's a code. Okay, now so line down and line up are very very similar in this particular solution. It's a case of recursion where this is an n squared solution. In other words, if the length of text that you're doing is of length n, then we build it up, we reconstruct it by doing something that builds one of size 1, 2, 3 up to n, and the total amount of time is proportional to n squared. Now I believe that's necessary for the reversal thing, but the only difference really was then in one place when I did an xdef of ants, in one case answer was going to be the answer to this macro, In one case, I changed ans into its previous value, followed by something carriage return. In the second case, I preceded by the other one. So in one case, I'm reversing the final order. In one case, I'm not. But otherwise, the codes are identical, and they're very similar to what we discussed yesterday. That is, you have a macro that sets it up, then it calls the other macro with a delimiter at the end of the parameters. The other macro tests to see if you've got to the end. If you have, then the next thing is just the answer. If you haven't, then you augment the answer, and the next thing is to repeat the situation over and over again. And that will produce then finally the answer as a long string of text. It's a control sequence, but it's also a long string of text. And the long string of text is the answer to the problem that you wanted to produce by line down. Now the bottom is an alternate solution that for line down that would have worked without in order n instead of order n squared. I would use this is exactly the same text as in the beginning, except I'm calling line dn instead of line down, so that you can see the line dn macro. And the trick about this, the only reason this had to be more complicated, is that I had to switch between this one and this one. This one calls lndn calls linedn, and they flip back and forth between each other. The reason is that you have to check before you get to the last line that you're at the end. A carriage return cannot be followed by if without TeX assuming that there's going to be a missing carriage return on the next line. So we had to put this efficient solution is just shown there for those who would try the case where these two were equal and not flipping. You're going to get an error message on the last line of that alignment saying that because there was an if following a carriage return. This was expanding the thing as it went instead of building up the answer. I believe. In fact, why did I gdef ans to be null? Oh,